Hello and welcome to another episode of The Living Philosophy. Today's episode I want to talk about Elon Musk's theory of AI, or his idea of making AI with Neuralink as an extra layer of the mind. Because I think this is a really fascinating idea of, and a potential for transforming humanity as a whole. And it's got some interesting things that I'd like to map over between the unconscious and AI, which might change the way you look at AI itself. So I suppose the best way to start is by looking at what are the layers of the mind now. And you've got the reptilian layer of the mind and the mammalian layer of the mind, and these form like the emotional and autonomic parts of you. So this is, you don't have to think about breathing, you don't have to think about creating your dreams. These are all things that happen deeper in the mind that are all outside of consciousness. And so this is like the emotional part of you, the part of you that gets fired up and moves your hormones around in fight or flight. So these are the more animal parts of us. But then outside of that, what's evolved in the last million years is the prefrontal cortex and the neocortex as a whole. So the neocortex is this layer of the brain which is all kind of entirely around that, and it's gotten very overgrown in us primates. And this is associated with logic, with rationality, and with our creative aspects and with language. So everything really that makes us human, like important things like self-control of our emotions even, that's the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. So all of these things that make us fundamentally human have really kind of come along in the last million years with the evolution of this brain, and we call it like the primate brain, this neocortex, which has just grown so expanded in us primates. And Musk says that AI is like another, or his view of AI with what they'll be doing with Neuralink is another layer of the brain. So you can think of these three layers as being, they're separate systems, but they communicate with each other and they supplement each other, and they have different tasks and different capabilities. So the idea of AI is, so Musk says that we already have AI, that it's just that it's very slow, because it's with these phones and we have to type using our thumbs and we have to think about it and we have to like pen it down into the phone. So it's this slow process, but it is artificial intelligence. It's an extra layer of the brain, because I no longer need to remember dates or so many things, because I can just I can go to Google, ask Google what you need to know. And I think that's a very interesting way of viewing it. And so what he wants to do with Neuralink is to put these electrodes into the brain so that you don't have to actually search for something. So you no longer need the phone because you can just do it. It's actually just another part of your brain. And so you have all the access to the internet within the flash of a thought. And you don't need to go through the process of sending it up through the layers and down through that. So it's an interesting way of viewing the unconscious as or this new layer of the brain. AI is this new layer of the brain. But I think there's room for a different perspective there as well, insofar as the unconscious is concerned and the subconscious is concerned. Because when you think of what AI is, you think of what the internet is, it's an abundance of information. And let's talk about what powers you would have access to as someone with that new AI layer of the brain. Well, you would have access to abundant information, so you could be connected to everything that's on the internet in an instant. And so you could think of that as a sort of the hive mind, being connected into a hive mind, because you're connected into the information of the hive mind, but also communication. So when people think of a collective consciousness, of everyone being connected on some deep level, it's often a misunderstanding of what Jung meant by the collective unconscious. They thought of it as a hive mind rather than as what it is. I'll link to that video. But when people think of like a hive mind, that's what you would have, and that could drastically change the way what it is to be human, because you're constantly connected into to the hive. And I wonder, how would it change individualism if you're constantly tapped into something collective and you no longer have the fully isolated experience? Because even on the last episode of Joe Rogan, Musk talked about how you wouldn't have to translate a thought into words. You could just send it into another person. And so much of art is the experiencing something and trying to translate it into words, trying to form the words in a certain way so they evoke the same feeling in the other. But what if you can just communicate that feeling directly? Like, here's the brain state that I'm experiencing and how you're experiencing it, more or less the same. I know Tolkien felt so frustrated with his creation of Middle Earth. He said that he felt like he'd it was like that image of going into a dream and trying to come back with something from the dream. And he said, I came back with hands of gold, but I found that it was just dirt, really. And he's trying to show you that it was gold, even though it's kind of lost. So it's that thing of bringing something out of the unconscious, bringing something out of something that feels so rich, and trying to communicate that. And his writing was his best attempt. But obviously for him, it felt inferior to what he'd actually experienced. And for any strong experience, that's always the case. So it could potentially change that and make us feel a much more connected animal. Like we can immediately connect on a deep level. But it's like a new unconscious. It's like a mirror. It's a superconsciousness rather than an unconsciousness. So in some level, it's the mirror of the unconscious, because it's not a thinking thing in itself. You can think of the unconscious as a vast reservoir of information, your memories, your values, and it can connect so many data points in a feeling. Because thinking and consciousness is so slow, it takes so long to process and to verbalize a thought, and to consciously think anything kind of takes forever, and it's a very slow process, but it's got massive fruits and flowers, as we can see from what's happened with modernity. But the unconscious takes in all this information, so your consciousness can only take in and process a certain number of points of experience at any one moment. But as we've seen with hypnosis, the body can actually record those other things. You still aware of a noise, even though you mightn't be consciously aware of it. So that still goes in and is processed in the unconscious. And the internet as a superconsciousness is similar to that. It's this vast reservoir of extra information that you're drawing on. Except unlike the unconscious, it would have an immediate bridge built to it so you can access it. So we can have difficulty, if you ever struggle to remember a word, like you say, it's on the tip of your tongue, but there's that imperfect access between the consciousness and the unconscious. But obviously with the connection with the superconsciousness would be a lot quicker. So you might be better going up a layer rather than down a layer. So if you want to try to remember a word, you might be better going to Google with your superconsciousness, your Neuralink superconsciousness, rather than trying to remember it through your unconsciousness. Even though probably still it would be quicker to remember through your unconscious, because the links are so built. So if the word comes, like, I'm not going to think of each of these individual words by Googling them, but because they just come so naturally. But when you're stuck, you might go to the superconsciousness. So those are just some thoughts that I've been having on that extra layer of the brain where Musk is talking about with AI. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you'd like to see more, please subscribe and let me know what you think down in the comments. Hope you've enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.